Hello and welcome to the Dharma Podcast. In today's episode, we will explore a straightforward question. Why is the complete and true history of Indian communists still not a part of our school textbooks? Now, the unambiguous verdict of the century-long history of communism in India is this. Communism has been a force for absolute evil for the country. Not only did it derail the urgent task of national reconstruction after 1947, it systematically attempted to dismantle the invisible components that had held the Sanatana civilization together for centuries. And communism deliberately prevented and waged war against the decolonization of the Hindu cultural psyche. And tragically, and despite overwhelming evidence available in the public domain, this contemporary history of the communist cultural war and cultural genocide in India has never been told to at least 4 generations of Indian children where it has to be really told in school and college textbooks. And this 100 plus years of communism in India is also the history of insurrections against the Indian state. Think about it. After independence, India has never witnessed a single decade of political stability. Quite the contrary. India's fate in this period has resembled a frog that continuously struggles in a water kept at slow boil. And this is precisely what the communists have done to the country, almost single-handedly. Perhaps the full and true history of our communists will never be narrated in our textbooks because our communists are still the original history cheaters. They are educational vandals who usurp the script and the history and seize the building. Now, I am unaware what our children are being taught today in the name of history, civics, political science, social studies, and so on, but I distinctly recall what I had read in my textbooks when I was growing up. Let me recall a couple of examples. Obviously, we had the usual glorification of Mohandas Gandhi and Nawab Nehru and other Congress leaders who were presented as great heroes and patriots. And the chapters on communism and communist parties back then were always presented in a positive light. Our communist organizations and communist leaders were shown as agents of benevolence and compassion and justice and apostles of true democracy. And so, the first Indian communist terrorist was a man named M.N. Roy, and he was depicted in my textbooks as a great revolutionary and a freedom fighter. Next, the terrorist outfit known as Naxals or Naxalites, now also known, they merged with Maoists. They were painted in the colors of noble revolution and they were clothed in the suit of justice. The former communist chief minister of Kerala, E.M.S. Namboodiripad, he was supposed to have delivered equality to the poor peasants in Kerala. And all of Indira Gandhi's alleged economic programs and reforms scripted by the communists were hailed as the harbingers of a glorious new India. With that in mind, let's take 3 of Indira Gandhi's most notorious policies that have irreversibly shattered India. The first was the abolition of privy purses. This was a criminal breach of trust that, it was a trust that the princely states had reposed in the government of India based entirely on the word and the promise given by Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel. But thanks to Indira Gandhi, overnight, after the abolition of the privy purses, overnight several minor princes were completely impoverished, they came onto the streets, and with that, all the ancient, unbroken Hindu cultural customs, celebrations, and festivals were destroyed in the territories in which they had ruled. And this abolition of privy purses was done at the advice and the behest of the communists who had branded our princes as feudal, and therefore these princes had to be destroyed. Number two, bank nationalization, which all of you are familiar with. This was a completely evil scheme which was again authored by the communist coterie that surrounded Indira Gandhi. Nationalization of banks not only destroyed the efficiency and profitability of all these 14 private banks, it also stifled the Indian economy, and the eventual explosion in bank NPAs, the widespread nepotism, mismanagement, corruption, and criminality, all of them have their roots in Indira Gandhi's bank nationalization done more than 50 years ago. Next, land ceiling legislations or the so-called land reforms. This was Indira Gandhi dressed this up as land reforms, and it was again scripted by our communists. Land ceiling legislation directly led to the wholesale fragmentation of land in India, and it bankrupted lakhs of farmers across the country. But the real beneficiaries were the large landowners who were also close to the Congress party. I can go on and on, giving list after list of this kind of, communist damage, but I think these high profile examples should suffice for now to show the kind of national damage that the communists have inflicted. Next, the story of the communist capture of Indian education is quite well known to repeat here. But the kind of disaster that it has inflicted on us is impossible to undo. Indian education over the last 50 years has become a national ordinance factory of the far left, and I'll tell you why. Parents send their children to school and college, and children emerge with a degree or a PhD in treason against India. And this has happened because for 5 decades, the Naxals controlled the guns, the communist parties controlled the brains. But education is perhaps the most important key to open the doors for a better future, and this is precisely why in the 1970s, the communists envisioned a future which is our present. And to the communists, this was a future where children, teenagers, and young adults would become volunteers and willing cannon fodder in the fourth generation warfare that is being fought against India, both outside and within. And this ongoing fourth generation warfare, it is among the strongest cases that we can make for narrating the true and full history of communism and its demonic practitioners. And I'll just give a couple of outlines. The first page of this history will tell you a truth hiding in plain sight. That from its inception, Indian communists have been unabashed slaves and agents of the former USSR and China, and the ideological children of these early communists have even today remained puppets of the global leftist forces such as George Soros. My research and experience tells me that our textbooks still do not mention the role of the communists in sabotaging the Indian freedom struggle, and they also do not tell the dark story of the open communist support for the creation of Pakistan. The same thing also holds true for the fact that our textbooks do not mention how the Indian communist parties actually welcomed and celebrated China's invasion of Tibet and its war against India in 1962. The communist archives are full of joy about how this 1962 Chinese invasion was actually the prelude for a grand revolution that they were all so eagerly waiting for. But writing this truthful of Indian communism also means opening another dark chapter in the unsavory life and the ugly career of Nawab Nehru. As the Prime Minister of India, Nehru was fully aware of the fact that the Communist Party of India, CPI, it had not split then. The CPI used to receive a substantial amount of 20 crore rupees every year from the USSR in the 1950s. This money was received in Russian currency. Now, if an ordinary citizen had done this, it would be classified as criminal smuggling of foreign currency and that person would be jailed immediately. Yet, Nawab Nehru allowed this criminal smuggling of Russian currency by the CPI, the Prime Minister of India himself. After this, let's get to perhaps the darkest chapter in the communist history of India. It is also the most violent chapter. I have never come across a single comprehensive volume till date which documents the 100 years long violent terrorism of communists against lakhs of innocent Indians. All we have are scattered news reports, some analytical essays, and intelligence and data on various websites, but nothing in a single volume about communist terrorism. Communist terror in India is as old as the Communist Party itself, but because we can't narrate all the terrorist incidents, let me take a random example to begin with. This example is the enthusiastic support and the active participation of the communists in the Razakar terrorism in the Nizam of Hyderabad's genocide against helpless Hindus in Telangana, parts of Karnataka and parts of the Marathwada region in Maharashtra. And from this support for Razakar terrorism all the way up to the ongoing murders of Hindus in Kerala, the violent records of communist terrorism in India are enough to fill several volumes. In fact, the communists have attained a high degree of expertise and success in this heinous endeavor of terrorism. The rivers of blood of innocent Indians spilled by comrades in the jungles and villages has not tainted their political masters and their handlers sitting in various Communist Party offices, as well as the larger communist ecosystem whose members have infiltrated into other parties, chiefly the Congress Party. To illustrate this, let's take the case of the late Gauri Lankesh. She was another mad, insane communist radical whose death was mourned by Sitaram Yechuri. But what is unknown to most people is the fact that Gauri Lankesh was extremely close friends with a Maoist terrorist named Saket Rajan, who was killed more than a decade ago in a police encounter. All the while, Gauri Lankesh had acted as a conduit for these Maoists and Saket Rajan living in the jungles of Malenadu. Incidents like this, episodes of Saket Rajan, the real history and career of people like Gauri Lankesh, all these things must be included in our school textbooks so that our children can learn the real truth of communism and communists in India. Let's take another story. This is the gruesome story of Master Jayakrishnan in Kerala. He was brutally hacked to death right in front of his school children, and this act of terror must also be part of our textbooks. Likewise, our textbooks must also have a chapter on the wanton, frequent, targeted and ongoing murders of the cadres of the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh. In Kerala alone, more than 800 RSS cadres were murdered from 1994 to 2002. That number is easily double for the period from 2002 and 2020. And this excludes the killings of Hindu activists who did not formally belong to the RSS. Next, communist support for terrorists of all kinds should be another mandatory chapter in our school books. Now, this communist support for terror is a history of more than 70 years, roughly beginning with a communist pamphlet. Now, this pamphlet was written in the 1940s and it basically supported Suhrawardi's Islamic mobs who unleashed a genocide of Hindus on the so-called Direct Action Day in Calcutta in 1946. This must also be made a chapter in our school textbooks. Yet another chapter should also narrate the communist support for Christian evangelism, which led to the cold-blooded murder of Swami Lakshmanananda Saraswati in 2008 in Odisha. And Swami Lakshmanananda Saraswati was about 84 years old, and he was engaged in a lifelong service to Hindu Dharma by trying to prevent tribals from converting into Christianity by force or fraud or both. But overall, wherever communists have acquired state power, two things have invariably occurred. The first was the manner in which they have used brute force, violence, and terror to retain political power, and they have transformed the entire state machinery into a branch office of their Communist Party. Come to think of it, it is unthinkable that only the Communist Party could rule West Bengal for a record number of 38 years without encountering any opposition, or the fact that elections were not rigged on a massive scale in West Bengal for the same period. The second point is the manner in which these communist governments have succumbed completely to the jihadis and violent Islamic forces. And so it is no accident that Kerala today has emerged as the Jihad laboratory and factory of India, and in West Bengal, the jihadis are pretty much, they rule the roost. Their support is inevitable to any government that comes to power in West Bengal. So unless these key points of the history of communism in India are introduced on an urgent basis in our school textbooks, political victories, economic prosperity, and all the other nice things will take us only so far as a nation. On the contrary, if this dark history of Indian communism is not urgently told to our children in schools, it will only further erode whatever civilizational strength that the Hindus have still managed to retain. On that note, we can conclude today's podcast. Thank you. If you like this episode, please consider making a contribution of your choice to the Dharma Podcast so that we can offer you more such informative and insightful content on a range of topics related to Indian history, political discourse, Hindu civilization, culture, and so on. Please don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Do like and share our podcasts, and do hit the bell icon. Thank you.